Under the blazing twin suns, on a lonely outpost carved into alien stone, a retired captain watched something impossible. An orphan drake who thought he was a dog, and a loyal shepherd who thought nothing of loving him back. What began as a fragile bond would soon challenge every rule, unite an entire station, and light a bridge between two worlds no one believed could ever meet. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Pre-dawn at Ridgepoint Station always felt like standing inside a paused heartbeat. The air carried a faint, metallic taste, and the twin suns of Kepler 472c had not yet climbed over the jagged ridge spires. Ronan Vale, a retired logistics officer, moved quietly through the dim corridors, his boots whispering on metal grates. Beside him, Misty trotted with the calm certainty of a veteran therapy dog, her pale fur catching the faint glow of safety lights. The station's proximity alarm had stirred him from shallow sleep, its tone sharp and cold. Something small had triggered the sensors near the outer vent fields, and rules said to inspect it once. Outside the airlock, the world lay silent and strange. Fine dust curled around the base of the antennae like restless smoke. Ronan scanned the ridge horizon and saw nothing but the familiar shadows of the outpost buildings. Then Misty pulled forward with a quiet. They followed the faint beacon toward District 9's cracked service fence. The signal grew stronger. A thin shape lay tangled in loose wire near the lip of a damaged vent. Ronan crouched. The creature was the size of his palm, its delicate limbs shaking, its wings half folded and caught in the wire like shredded glass. Scales shimmered faintly, with an inner glow that shifted from pale gold to blue. And its eyes, bright and alert, watched not Ronan, but Misty. Regulation said report and wait. It was the safe thing, the proper thing. But the wind began to rise, carrying sharp dust, and motion sensors whispered that something larger moved beyond the ridge. Maybe nothing. Maybe adults of the same kind. Ronan's breath tightened. Misty lowered into a calm sit, chest rising and falling, slowly. The tiny creature watched her and began copying her breathing, little chest expanding, then releasing. He snipped the wires one by one until the small body sagged free. He could feel its trembling through the gloves. In the medbay, Dr. Helen Quaid leaned over the table with sharp focus. "Flarekin," she said softly, as her scanner glided above the torn wing. "Not native. Probably seeded here long ago by travelers we still argue about in journals." She sealed the wing membrane with a thin thermal patch, while Misty lay at the edge of the room like a silent guard. The creature never stopped watching the dog, its blue eyes steady and full of something more than fear. "We need to log it," Helen said. "Tag number for the database." "Cinder," Ronan replied without looking up. For 12 days, Cinder stayed in recovery. Every day, Misty came to lie beside the energy field, and every day, Cinder tried to do what she did. When Misty sat, he folded into a wobbly sit. When she drank, he pushed his cup to the same corner. When she curled to rest, Helen called it social mimicry. Ronan called it determination. By day 13, the outer perimeter pings returned. Small heat signatures traced slow loops beyond the ridge spires, staying distant but never vanishing. Ops Chief Ivan Rosado frowned at the scan feed. Might be adults, he said. Ronan studied the glowing shapes. Or they're watching him. On day 15, they tried a soft release. Ronan carried Cinder out in the rover, while Misty sat alert by his side. The release site lay under the clear twin suns, a quiet patch of warm stone dotted with crystalline growths. Ronan set the small flarekin down gently. Cinder stretched his wings, trembled, and looked toward the ridge where the distant signatures glimmered. Then he turned back, toward Misty. Ronan sighed and took 2 steps away. Cinder followed 2 steps toward the dog. They were halfway back to the station when Misty barked once. Ronan checked the rear cam. A shadow. No chance he keeps up, Ronan muttered. But when they rolled into the vehicle bay, Cinder dropped from the sky in a clumsy glide and crawled straight to Misty's side, pressing himself against her fur. Later that night, Helen found Ronan staring at a small arc of crystals newly placed near the bay doors, arranged with careful symmetry. A gift, she whispered. Ronan touched the cold surface and said nothing. Inside, Misty slept deeply, her chest rising steady, and tucked against her, glowing faintly, Cinder matched her breathing as the long station night settled around them. The corridors of Ridge Point Station had never felt alive before, not like this. Once, they were only gray halls and humming conduits, a place of routine and silence. Now, every shift seemed to begin with whispers about the flarekin that followed the therapy dog through the outpost like a second shadow. The miners called him Cinder, though no one had officially approved the name. It had simply settled on him, much like how he had settled on Misty. Ronan watched the change spread through the station in small, unexpected ways. Workers paused when the pair passed, their tired faces softening. Conversations that used to fade into silence stretched longer. Even the air seemed lighter, though the filters had not changed. It was strange, he thought, how something so small could alter the mood of an entire station built to endure storms and silence. Cinder had grown since that first night. Still no larger than a house cat, but stronger now, his wings catching the dim light with flashes of copper and blue. He had learned to glide short distances through the low corridors, though landing remained an uncertain art. Often, he would stumble against Misty's side, then copy her calm stance as if nothing had happened. She tolerated it with patient grace, shifting just enough to keep him upright. She was cataloging medical logs when she realized sick call rates had dropped in the past month. Fewer reports of stress headaches, fewer disputes among crew. Look at this, she told Ronan, sliding a tablet across the table. I think he's improving station wellness. Ronan raised an eyebrow. He's just being here. Exactly, Helen said. And somehow, that's enough. Soon, others began collecting their own quiet data. Even from operations, charted productivity and found it up 12%. Patricia from engineering noted fewer errors in maintenance reports, and everyone agreed on one thing: morale was higher. There was more laughter in the common areas, more shared meals, more life. But the most remarkable change happened not in the data, but in the eyes of the people. One evening, when Misty and Cinder walked the main deck, a group of younger he crouched low, wings spreading just enough to catch the light, and then he glowed. It was not a blinding flash. It was soft, like the shimmer of dawn on calm water. Colors moved gently across his scales, rose, gold, pale green, flowing in patterns that seemed to breathe. The crew froze. Misty sat calmly, tail sweeping the floor, as if this were nothing new. The glow pulsed slowly, and for reasons no one could name, the tension in the room thinned. People who had been standing rigidly found themselves relaxing. One of the technicians, a quiet woman named June, sank onto the bench as tears slipped down her face, though she smiled as she wiped them away. "It feels safe," she whispered. Ronan stood in the corner, silent. He did not understand it either. Cinder was no larger than his arm, yet in that glow, he seemed older than the station itself, a pair of miners stopping by on break just to sit near Misty and Cinder. Then more came, and soon there was a quiet line each evening. They did not speak much. They simply sat while the flarekin rested beside the dog, glowing softly as if listening to something no one else could hear. Helen called it therapeutic presence. Ronan thought it felt like hope. Still, there were questions, even worried aloud that Cinder might be distracting the crew from critical work. Patricia asked if they were encouraging an attachment that would be impossible to keep. And from the ridge beyond the station, faint heat signatures still appeared some nights, lingering and watching before fading again into the silence. One night, as Ronan closed the observation deck, he found Cinder perched on the wide windowsill. The twin suns had sunk behind the ridges, and only the glow of the distant crystal fields lit the horizon. Misty lay nearby, eyes half closed. Her breathing slow and steady. Cinder pressed himself against her fur and began to glow again. That soft, shifting light that seemed to push back the darkness. Ronan stood watching, knowing the questions would not stop, knowing the colonial authority would one day come asking. But in that moment, with the hum of the station low and the world outside caught in deep shadow, he thought of the workers who no longer spoke of leaving, of the laughter returning to the mess hall, of the way the air itself seemed lighter. Cinder's glow reflected faintly on the glass, and Ronan wondered if maybe this little creature had not just found a home here. Maybe he had brought one with him. The new habitat opened on a quiet morning, the kind where the twin suns rose like molten coins beyond the jagged cliffs, painting the valley in soft gold. Ronan stood with Helen on the observation platform, watching Misty and Cinder explore the space below. The room was nothing like the cold containment bays or the cramped med pods where Cinder had once healed. This place was open, alive. One whole wall was lined with wide, transparent panels that stretched from floor to ceiling, facing the valley. It was a room full of windows, built so he could see the world, and so the world could see him. The crew had worked for weeks to build it, welding through off hours, stringing light cables in the dim corridors. They had built it not because regulations demanded it, but because they wanted to. And now, it stood like a promise, a place not of isolation, but of welcome. Misty padded along the smooth floor, sniffing each corner with practiced care, while Cinder followed close, his wings half spread as if the air itself felt new. People gathered along the gallery above, silent at first, then softly cheering. Some had brought their meal packs to sit on the benches. Lingering, Ronan saw miners, who had never spoken much outside of work, sitting shoulder to shoulder, smiling like children. Even Coleman, the administrator who rarely left his office, stood at the back with arms folded, his stern face strangely soft. Cinder reached the center of the room and stopped. His scales caught the sunlight pouring through the windows, flashing copper, then blue, then silver. He turned in a slow circle, as if measuring this new space, then made a low humming sound. The same one he used when curled against Misty. Misty responded with a slow wag of her tail, and that simple gesture felt like approval, like a key turning in a lock. By the second day, the habitat had become the heart of Ridgepoint Station. Visitors came in steady streams, not to study, but simply to be there. They sat on the benches, leaned against the cool glass, or sprawled on the floor, near Misty, while Cinder perched on his favorite ledge. The engineers called it observational enrichment. The miners called it peace. It wasn't just watching. Something subtle began to happen. The noise of the station faded when people entered. Conversations softened. Movements slowed. The air itself seemed warmer. Helen began tracking data again, though she did it quietly, not to break the spell. Her charts showed lower blood pressure, steadier heart rates, improved sleep cycles among the crew. Even the night shift reported fewer stress incidents. And through it all, Cinder watched. His bright eyes followed each person, lingering on their faces with an intensity that felt almost human. Sometimes, when someone sat quietly for long enough, he would leave Misty's side and walk to them. He never touched, only sat near, glowing faintly, his light steady like a heartbeat. People said it felt like he was listening to them without words. Ronan saw it for himself one night, when a young technician named Nina came in alone. She had been distant for weeks. She sat on the floor by the windows, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the distant crystal fields. Cinder approached slowly and sat beside her, glowing a soft golden shade. Nina didn't speak, didn't move, but after a long while, her breathing slowed, her shoulders loosened, and she whispered, "Thank you." Cinder only blinked, then rested his head on his claws, as if he understood. News of the room spread beyond the station. Other outposts sent messages asking if they could visit, if they could see the Flarekin and the shepherd who had made him stay. The colonial authorities sent another inquiry, this one curious rather than cautious, asking for detailed reports on emotional impact. Coleman read it, sighed, and said, "Well, looks like they've noticed." But Ronan wasn't thinking about regulations anymore. He was thinking about what the habitat had become, a place where people remembered how to breathe, where silence was not empty, but full. A room full of windows, yes, but more than that, a room full of second chances. As the twin suns sank behind the cliffs, their fading light washing the glass in rose and amber, Cinder climbed to his high perch and began to hum again, low and steady. Misty lay below him, eyes half closed, her ears flicking to the sound. And all around them, scattered like quiet stars across the benches and floor, the crew listened, still and calm, as if the small glowing creature had built not just a habitat, but a home for every soul who stepped inside. The first time anyone saw it happen, they thought it was just a trick of the glass. The viewing panels caught the late light from the twin suns and scattered it through the habitat, shimmering across the floor where Cinder stood. But then his scales began to glow brighter, one by one, until thin lines of color traced across his body like rivers of molten gold. Misty lifted her head from her spot by the wall. Ronan was there, leaning against the railing, and he could feel something shift in the air. Cinder was facing the wide windows, where beyond the glass, the valley stretched in stillness. Outside, across the ridge, a group of wild drakes had gathered. They stood on the stone ledges, wings folded, their colors muted by distance. Cinder raised his head, and the glow on his scales pulsed in a soft rhythm. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like a pattern, like words without sound. The wild drakes responded. Faint flickers of light moved across their wings, distant but clear. Helen, standing beside Ronan, whispered, "He's talking to them." And it did feel like talking. Pulses of light moving back and forth, faster now, changing color. Bright white to copper to deep sea blue. The wild drakes stepped closer to the station walls, their eyes bright. Misty rose and walked to Cinder's side, not touching him, but close, like she always did when something mattered. For weeks, they had wondered if Cinder missed his own kind, if the wild drakes that circled the cliffs would ever accept him. Now it seemed they had an answer. He had not chosen between them. He was building something else entirely. The display lasted minutes, maybe more. No one spoke. The colors danced like ribbons between them, spilling across the floor and ceiling, painting the walls. Even the hum of the life support systems seemed to fade. When the lights faded at last, the wild drakes took flight, soaring back toward the cliffs, their wings flashing one last burst of silver before vanishing into the shadows. Afterward, Helen reviewed the recordings, trying to map the sequence of colors and pulses. "It's too structured to be random," she said, scrolling through the data streams. "There's symmetry, repetition, not just the science of it, but what it meant." Cinder would climb to the highest perch in his room and let his lights spill out across the glass. The wild drakes would answer from the cliffs, their colors like sparks against the fading sky. No words, no sound, just light across distance. What surprised Ronan most was how it affected the people. The hard edges of life on Ridgepoint Station softened. The miners worked with a new quiet focus. Engineers stayed late just to sit by the windows and watch. Arguments that once burned hot now cooled quickly. It was as if the station itself had begun breathing in time with the soft glow from Cinder's scales. One night, Helen said what they were all thinking. "He's teaching us," she whispered, "not to be like him, but to see each other." Months later, when the Colonial Authority returned for their review, they found not just a functioning station, but something gentler, stronger, alive. They watched as light rippling from him in steady waves, and even the inspectors stood still, silent, as if they too felt the invisible bridge stretch out between species, between hearts. And in that quiet glow, Ronan understood what Cinder had done. He had not simply adapted, he had connected. He had shown them that sometimes the strongest bridges are not made of steel or stone, but of trust, of presence, and of light.